Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really digging into a fascinating set of sources. They focus on what happens when this, radical unified conviction meets powerful established authority head on. We're looking mainly at the early days described in the book of Acts, chapters 4 and 5 specifically. Our goal here is to kind of unpack the tension. You've got this new group of believers super unified, and then this unified opposition from their religious and political leaders. We want to understand organizationally, psychologically, how does that unwavering commitment lead to growth, not, suppression?
Right. And to set the scene a bit, historically, this kicks off right after a major event, the healing of a lame man. Peter and John used that moment to preach their core message, Jesus' resurrection, and they immediately get a reaction, a sharp one, from the establishment, the priests, the temple captain, and crucially, the Sadducees. The sources say they were more than just annoyed. They were grieved, even troubled.
Yeah, and it wasn't just some abstract theological debate for the Sadducees especially. Well, they flat out rejected the whole idea of resurrection. So this teaching, it wasn't just wrong in their eyes. It directly threatened their ideology, their power base, the whole status quo.
Exactly. Their grievance was structural. It undermined their authority. And here's the thing that really grabs you right away, the paradox we're diving into. They arrest Peter and John, these powerful figures clamp down. But the movement doesn't just stop. No, the sources actually emphasize that while the leaders were trying to shut it down, the message spread even faster. Something like 5,000 men joined the believers. So the opposition, it acted like fuel almost immediately. Okay, so let's really get into that confrontation. The council, the Sanhedrin, right, the highest authority, they bring the apostles back in, and the order couldn't be clearer. They commanded them not to speak at all, nor teach in the name of Jesus. Full stop. Total silence. That's what they demanded.
But Peter and John,
Yeah.
their response is just a masterclass in conviction over institutional pressure.
Yeah.
They basically say, look, you judge. Is it right for us to listen to you rather than God? And then they follow that right up with this absolute statement of purpose. We cannot but speak the things which we have seen and heard. It's non-negotiable for them.
What I find really interesting, though, is how the council saw them. They apparently marveled at their boldness, just raw confidence, even while kind of dismissing them as unlearned and ignorant men. But they couldn't deny the connection. They took knowledge of them, that they had been with Jesus.
Yeah, and that distinction is absolutely vital to how the source material frames knowledge and authority. Okay, so they didn't have the official credentials, right? No seminary degrees from the establishment. But their boldness, their authority, it didn't come from that. The sources argue it stemmed from direct, experiential knowledge. They learned from the greatest teacher, as the source puts it.
So the argument is that real conviction, real authority, it isn't about the paperwork or the institutional stamp of approval. It's rooted in personal experience, in what you know because you've lived it. This knowledge they had, it's presented as eternal truth, which is contrasted really sharply with what the source calls earthly knowledge, the kind that it claims just vanishes away.
Exactly. Their boldness wasn't just fronting, it was deep certainty. Because, as the source says, Christ to the Spirit dwelt in them. They had this wisdom, this certainty that the opposition just couldn't argue with, no matter how much earthly power they held.
Okay, so if their conviction was that solid, that non-negotiable, how did they manage the practical side? Building a resilient group, an organization really, under constant threat. That leads us right into this theme of unity. And the sources stress, interestingly, that there was unity on both sides. The persecutors, for example, they came against Stephen later in one accord, a unified front for, suppression.
Right. And you contrast that sort of dark unity, that unity for control, with the really remarkable practical unity of the believers. This wasn't just theoretical. It was seen as the direct result of Christ's own prayer, that they all may be one. And the source is emphatic. This unity had to be all the time, not just now and then. It was the visible proof of their shared belief and purpose.
And the way that showed up was pretty radical. It defined a whole new way of living together, communally. Acts 4.32 says, the multitude of them that believed were of one heart and of one soul. They had all things common. That's a fundamental shift in thinking about ownership.
Wow. But wasn't that incredibly risky? I mean, sharing everything?
Yeah.
What did the source say drove that kind of structure? Why did they do it?
The motivation seems to be the absolute key, according to the source. This sharing food, clothes, housing, financial aid, even scholarships apparently was completely voluntary, without force, without pressure, without compulsion. It was an enthusiastic giving. Their logic basically was, look, if our salvation, the most important thing, is shared and universal, then surely the stuff of this earth should be freely given too. And this level of voluntary trust, this generosity, it became this powerful, visible sign of their inner change. It kind of neutralized the whole focus on individual wealth that can really tear groups apart. Let's circle back to the opposition for a moment. We need to be really clear about what exactly the grievances of the traditionalists were. We know it wasn't like theft or disturbing the peace in the usual sense. The core thing, the trigger for all this unified hostility, was simply that the apostles taught the people and preached through Jesus the resurrection from the dead. That was it.
And that brings us right back to the Sadducees, mentioned again in Acts 5. They were filled with indignation. You have to remember, their whole ideological platform. They were strict interpreters of the written law, politically powerful, and they rejected core doctrines like the resurrection, but also things like angels, the whole spiritual realm idea. The resurrection story directly attacked their authority, their theology, their political standing, all of it.
And here's where the story takes this incredible turn. The irony is just,
wow.
They lock up the apostles specifically because they're teaching resurrection, right?
Yeah.
A concept tied to the spiritual, to divine intervention.
Exactly. And then what happens? Acts 5.19 says, the angel of the Lord by night opened the prison doors. An angel. The very thing the Sadducees denied exists. That angel lets them out and tells them basically, go back to the temple and keep preaching. So the mechanism of their released divine intervention, an angel, it simultaneously validates the apostles' message and completely undermines the authority's power. Just like that. Dramatic.
So the goal of all the threats, the imprisonment, it wasn't just punishment. It was about control, wasn't it? They explicitly wanted to stop the message spreading no further among the people. Containment. Stop the growth.
Right. Which raises this huge organizational question, really. Can something that is truly of God, as the source puts it, actually be stopped by human threats? And that's where Gamaliel's advice in Acts 5 comes in. He was a respected Pharisee, and he tells the council basically, leave these men alone. If their plan or work is merely human, it'll fail on its own. But if it's from God, you cannot overthrow it. And the source takes that principle and applies it really broadly. It suggests that if your core purpose, your mission, your position, even your relationships are genuinely founded on truth, on something of God, they have this inherent resilience. Earthly power can't ultimately destroy it.
Okay, so resilience. If they're facing this constant hostility from the outside, how did the individuals, the believers, maintain that commitment? How did they keep the internal cohesion going? The sources say they did it by being intentionally unmoved. They point to Paul later as an example, his confidence. None of these things move me, so that I might finish my course with joy. That's steadfastness.
Yeah, and the qualities of this unmoved messenger are laid out quite clearly. They're described as being built upon the rock of ages. Their core identity is solid, so fear doesn't find fertile ground. The instruction is pretty direct to be in nothing terrified by your adversaries. Doesn't matter what kind of power the opposition claims, magical, material wealth, political influence, whatever. Success comes from holding on to this internal trust that's separate from the external chaos.
But that kind of individual strength doesn't happen in a vacuum, does it? It needed a practical support system to actually work. It wasn't just about lone heroes being brave. Our sources bring in that idea of unity again, citing 1 Corinthians 12. The instruction there is clear. No schism in the body. Members must have the same care one for another. That's the systemic internal support structure.
Absolutely. And this leads to the idea of assisting messengers and admired members. Contribution wasn't just about dropping money in a pot, though that happened. It was much broader. Sharing knowledge, practical strength, and maybe most importantly, words of encouragement, that vital emotional and spiritual support. We get that specific example of Jose's nickname Barnabas, which means son of consolation or encouragement. And yes, he, having land, sold it and brought the money. But Barnabas is key. His nickname, son of consolation, tells you how crucial that encouragement role was. Genuine love, the sources imply, it's practical, it gives money, sure. But it also gives the morale needed to stand up to that unified opposition. It's about support.
And that whole system, the unified conviction, the practical sharing, and the mutual support, it generated something else. A visible, almost tangible spiritual power that boosted everyone's resolve. The sources mention that when the believers prayed together, unified, the place was shaken where they were assembled together and they were all filled with the Holy Ghost. This collective prayer, this shared spiritual focus, seems to have been the engine driving their momentum and clearing out any internal doubts. Okay, let's try and wrap this up. A final takeaway. It seems the core idea is this direct relationship. The stronger the hostility they faced, the stronger their conviction and unity became, and their practical, radical love, sharing everything, supporting each other, that was the undeniable, visible proof that their interchange was real. That's what made them so resilient.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is how that changes their whole perspective on resources. The source makes a point of saying earthly riches are, well, limited compared to what is stored in the bank of heaven. That reframing becomes their ultimate defense against fear and greed. Because they truly believed in God's provision and protection, they could boldly say, "The Lord is my helper. I will not fear what man shall do unto me." Their focus shifted, from the immediate threat to the eternal promise that neutralizes earthly power, in a way.
Which brings us right to our final thought, something provocative for you, the listener, to consider. Think about this. The sources keep stressing that the apostles weren't arrested for actual crimes, not theft, not rebellion in the usual sense. They were arrested solely because they taught the resurrection a message about transformation, about a different kind of power, a different reality. So if that simple teaching, combined with that radical, unified community living, was enough to deeply grieve powerful traditional leaders and trigger such unified opposition back then, what specific modern truth, or maybe what deeply held conviction today, if it were lived out with that same level of practical, visible, shared unity, what might draw a similarly unified, perhaps even hostile response from established structures now? That's definitely something worth reflecting on after this deep dive.